Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can I please have your attention? Can I please have your attention? Thank you very much for being here at our session on returning home. I think as the conference starts to draw towards a close, this is an apt session that you've chosen. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Angela. We have about 40 minutes to engage in conversation and hear from our speakers, after which I would like to encourage you to please promptly make your way to the lecture hall 1, where we'll have the keynote address. Angela?
Hi, everybody. My name is actually Angel Jones, but it's perfectly fine. I'd love to just understand where home is for everybody. But let's have a show of hands if your home is Nigeria. Why are you starting with that? And Ghana. Kenya. No Kenyans. Any East Africans? Tanzania. Rwanda. Malawi. South Africans. Uganda. Who else haven't we mentioned yet? And other. Good. Welcome. Good. Mali. Good. So I wanted to start with a very personal story, which from my point of view, as what I call a homecomer. I grew up in South Africa, never being proud of the color of my skin or my flag, knowing something was inherently wrong in our country and never having that sense of pride in being South African. I came to live in London for 7 years and was one of many freezing cold South Africans who was in the crowd in Trafalgar Square when Nelson Mandela came to speak to us as our new president. And he looked over all of us freezing cold South Africans and he said, "I love you so much, I want to put you in my pocket and take you home." And something moved within me and I burst into tears and I returned home and realized how lucky we were to be African and South African and how the potential at home was so incredible that in fact I've made it my mission now. So Homecoming Revolution is what we do. We call ourselves the Brain Gain Company for Africa and we encourage skilled Africans to come back. We work with all the businesses across the continent because there is such a talent shortage at home. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Yasmin Kumi to start with. She's the founder of African Foresight Group and the executive director of the Harambee Entrepreneurship Alliance, ex-McKinsey with 5 years under her belt of that, so quite a buffin, and currently with her MBA and MSc in African Studies at the University of Oxford. And then Eddie Ndopu, the internationally recognized human rights expert in disability justice, been nominated as the 50 most influential disabled people in the world and headed up the Amnesty International's Youth Engagement Program. Currently doing his Masters of Business Policy at Oxford University and is without a doubt one of the most outspoken yet influential South Africans that I've certainly ever met. So we welcome you both. Thank you very much. Maybe we can start by both of you sharing your experiences about what home means to you and a short understanding of where you are. Should we start with you, Yasmin?
Afternoon, everyone. I know you had a long day already, so I'm going to try and make this interesting. Home for me was always a difficult question, and I think, to be honest, until last year, I hadn't really settled what it would actually mean for me personally. As you might hear from my accent, I'm half German, and I grew up in Berlin, but I'm also half Ghanaian. My dad comes from Brong-Ahafo, for the ones who know Ghana, and he migrated to Germany when he was in his 20s, so that was in the 1970s. I had never been to Ghana until I was 21. My dad has not returned to Ghana for the past about 30 years. So I've actually never been to Ghana with my dad, which was very unusual because most of the people I knew in my surrounding who had a similar background went home from time to time. Home as in to Africa. And I never knew what Africa was. Nonetheless, in Germany, everyone labeled me as an African person because there's not that many black people in Germany. And I was always the African person. I was asked, oh, do you speak African? What is African food like? I had no idea. What I realized, though, was that my dad felt quite ashamed about coming from Ghana. When I asked him questions about Ghana, he usually was very, very short in responding, and we had a very, very loose contact with our family. At some point, I started getting very curious why my dad felt so ashamed about coming from Ghana. He always tried to cover it up, which is hard because he's still from Ghana, and you can see that. But he was always very, very keen on making sure that he's adapting as much as possible to the German culture. And he told me, look, Yasmin, Ghanaian economy will never be successful. There will never be any big businesses coming out of Ghana. Ghana can't develop. Ghana will never be like Germany. So why should you even go there? Of course, as stubborn as I was, I decided, okay, now I actually want to go to Ghana because if he says it's that bad, then I actually have to see it at least. So after I finished my undergraduate degree, I decided not to take up any of these big job offers and go to Ghana and work in agriculture. And I will never forget how I boarded my flight from Germany to Ghana. And that was my first time of ever going to Africa at the age of 21. And I was telling my dad, you know what I'm really excited about? I'm going to a country now where everyone looks like me. And I got to Ghana. And after 2 days, I learned what Obroni means, which means white person. Because I was called an Obroni all the time. So, and I hadn't really made peace with that for a long time because I felt that now the place I always thought I could call home because there I would be like everyone else was also a place where I was called a foreigner. And I was always trying to fight that. So when people called me Obroni, I always said, no, I'm not an Obroni. And I started speaking Twi and stuff to show them that I'm actually also Ghanaian. Now I don't care about that much anymore. I think my big learning is that home is wherever you feel that you are rooted. And home is where you feel or you choose that you can actually make an impact and be part of the society, no matter what your phenotype looks like. And I don't have a problem anymore when people call me a brony. I actually find it funny because I think it just shows how many identity crises we've all been going through in the history of mankind. But I don't think that it's what matters anymore to know where your home is. And my home is both in Ghana and in Germany. Thank you.
I really resonate with that, Yasmin. I think that home is a very complicated concept. And I think that I've realized over the years that one, it is possible not to feel at home in one's own home. And I think about my mother, who was an activist during the apartheid years, and how she was in self-imposed exile. And I was born in Namibia. And so in many ways, I think about Namibia as home, but that was a political imposition. And now, as one of the most sort of visibly disabled sort of public figures in South Africa, I have a very complicated affection with the concept of home, because in so many ways, South Africa as a country and many other countries across the continent, we have not designed our societies in a way that is welcoming for everybody. And so as a disability activist, as somebody that is visible in so many different spaces, I experience a lot of inaccessibility. And getting from point A to point B is next to impossible in so many spaces. And so the way that I think about home is that it's something that we carve out against the backdrop of restrictions and limitations. And so I guess, like you said, Yasmin, home has become something that I've had to define in relation to my current socio-political context. and so it's messy. It's not clearly defined, but I have learned to embrace the messiness. I've learned to sort of embrace the fact that home is never a destination. It's not a state of being, but rather a process of becoming.
Beautiful. Certainly, that complicated relationship with home, we find a lot of that, this love-hate relationship you have with home. The roller coaster ride, I find, being back. You know, that one minute you're overjoyed, the next minute you're traumatized. And I often compare it to, you know, when I lived in England, I was always a little bit happy and a little bit sad, and I lived within this bandwidth. But at home, I'm incredibly happy and incredibly sad. It's a very big life. We find that the reasons people return home are friends and family, a sense of belonging, the weather and the lifestyle, an exciting career, and that sense of significance. But there are plenty of things we hate as well. And I'd love to hear from both of you. What when you were away, did you miss most and love most about home? I suppose you've got an interesting answer there. What was home? What are you missing about Germany, being back in Ghana? What is the things that you really love and you really hate?
Okay, I was actually going to ask how I define that now, because I said that I have two homes. So I guess I liked what you just said about home being a process of becoming, because I think often we also make the mistake of attaching the idea or the notion of home to a location. I think often you find yourself being at home because you're surrounded by certain people, or you're able to accomplish a certain thing, or you're able to discover something new about you that just make you feel grounded. So I just wanted to say that as a caveat for what I'm going to try to say in relation to your question. At the moment, when people ask me about Germany and what I miss about Germany, there's not much that I can actually think of, because I've spent so much time in Germany compared to Ghana. And for me, it's a bit of a balancing act in my head and in my heart at the moment, because I'm thinking, okay, if I spend 20 years in Germany, then I have to spend 20 years in Ghana now. I don't know where that's going to happen. It might. But for me, I have a lot of things that I learned in Germany and that I've been able to benefit from in Germany and that I've enjoyed. There's things that I didn't like. For example, when it came to what I spoke about earlier, being seen as a stranger all the time and always having to prove myself that I'm actually well educated, that I'm actually able to speak German and all of that. But I don't really have that love-hate thing that many people have when they talk about home. For me, it's much more about constantly cherishing that you have a place where you can feel happy. And I'm a very positive person, so I'm always trying to discover these things myself. Sometimes it can mean that, oh, I just found a new apartment or a new office. We just moved into a new office last week. And that actually contributes to me feeling more home. But I don't have anything where I start to compare with where I've come from, because if I start to compare, then why did I make the decision in the first place? I think for me, the mindset is not to say, okay, I'm leaving somewhere to go somewhere. For me, it's more about I am somewhere right now and I'm happy here, and what happens tomorrow, what happened yesterday doesn't really matter so much for me. And I think when I look around me and people from the diaspora that I've met while I was in Ghana, who maybe have a similar background as well, of being half German and half Ghanaian, finally there's quite a lot of these people. I sometimes notice that they started making the comparison, and that is what actually started making them feel less home in Ghana. Because once you start doing that, you're actually going to start denouncing one or the other country. And I don't think that any country has deserved to be denounced, especially when it comes to African countries, because African countries are often being put into the position of being the places where everything is bad and where there's no development and where things are not working properly and so on. I don't like this comparative notion, because I think altogether, when you talk about development, development is a colonial term, right? And we often, as diasporans, come back, or come to Ghana or wherever and start comparing what we've seen elsewhere with what we have in Ghana. And then we say, oh, great, now there's a new shopping mall that is as big as what I've seen in London. But that is not the right thing to learn about Ghana and feel home. If you really want to feel home in Ghana, then you have to embrace that when you fly over it with a plane, it's mostly flat, and that's also nice. So I think my answer would be comparing is not necessarily the best way to feel home. I think the best way to feel home is to embrace where you are without thinking of where you were before or where you're going next, and trying to appreciate what you've discovered in that place, and at the same time appreciate whatever you've discovered in other places.
So sort of in keeping with what you've just said, I don't believe that things are static. You know, I'm a big believer that things are dynamic, and the South Africa of today is not the same as the South Africa of yesterday. So in the same way that I have evolved and grown over time, so too have the countries that I've once lived in. And so the idea of going back home, I struggle with that because I can never go back to the place that I once was in. Things are dynamic and things are fluid, and I guess I have found home in the recognition of that. I have felt at home in Canada for 4 years where I lived and I studied, but I can never go back to that Canada. I have felt at home for the first 11 years of my life living in Namibia. I can't go back to that Namibia. And I've subsequently lived, you know, after I graduated and I graduated from my undergrad in Canada, lived at home for 2 years before coming to Oxford. And that was a completely different South Africa in which I lived. And so I guess it's very unsettling for people to think that home is not a fixed thing in time and space. That makes people feel uncomfortable because we have told ourselves that home means being rooted in something. And I guess for me, I'm beginning to realize that that's not necessarily true. And that has liberated me because it has meant that I can ask more of the places that I find myself in. And so the love-hate relationship that you were speaking about, Angel, I definitely have a love-hate relationship with South Africa for many reasons. Personally, as a young professional, I have a very hate relationship with the fact that how is it possible that we can't design accessible transit for people with disabilities? How is it possible that in the year 2017, we're still talking about advocacy for ramps and for elevators? And I think to myself, I have a master's degree from Oxford, and I find myself in a very frustrating situation where I'm unable to move. And so we need to create the conditions for home. Home doesn't just happen organically. It doesn't just, it's something that needs to be cultivated and worked on. And so that is the perspective that I now have, and I'm somewhat unapologetic about asking more of the places that I call home, because home is something that we work on. It's a construction.
Thank you. That's a very interesting notion. And in fact, somebody did say I wasn't moving back, I was moving forwards, you know, where you go in that process. Certainly the idea of where can I create home, and to pick up on that is an important thing. You know, this idea of, we say to people, don't wait until it gets better, come home and make it better. And what I'd like to find out from you, and then open it to the floor, because I'm sure we've got lots of questions, is, you know, what draws people back is feeling that they can have a real sense of impact back home. And in fact, one skilled person that returns home actually creates, in the informal and informal sector, 5 new jobs. The ripple effect of skilled professionals returning home is significant. So really, in that understanding of creating your own home and discussing the notion of, must I go back because I feel guilty because I should go back, or am I creating a home that just works for me? Or unpacking that idea of Africa has a real skills shortage. they need me, I need to be there.
Sure. So I think for people like us in this room, there's a humility that is required. I think that people often think that we buy into the savior industrial complex where we think that we are the ones that are going to transform our society in a kind of sometimes paternalistic way. And I think if one is committed to going home, then one needs to approach that with a tremendous amount of humility. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier, that life moves on without you. Societies change, societies are dynamic. Nothing stops and waits for you to acquire certain knowledge, and and that society will welcome you with open arms. It doesn't work that way. I think that what is required is that, in as much as we are going to give back, we also need to open ourselves up to unlearning and relearning and doing things differently. So it's I agree, it is creation, but it's a co-creation. It's a co-creation with a society that has people that are there that opted to make different choices, that chose not to leave, and they've changed, we've changed, so it's a very collective kind of creation of home, if that makes any sense.
Have you decided, or you learn? Do you
Angel. Oh my goodness. I mean, so you and I, we've had this conversation before. I don't know, and I don't know, I think, is the best answer. It's the most honest answer I can give, and the I don't know comes from many reasons. Sometimes there is an exhaustion and a trauma associated with making it work. It is important to make things work, but sometimes it takes so much out of you that you end up sacrificing yourself. And so I'm in that limbo period where I definitely have a moral obligation to be part of the excitement that's happening around the continent and the things. So I want to be part of that, but whether or not that will look like me living in Joburg, I can't say that for sure.
Yeah, so I have had interesting conversations about this impact thing lately. And interestingly, I realized at some point that I might be quite a selfish person. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So what I'm trying to say is that I didn't decide to go to Ghana because, as you said earlier, I'm trying to help anyone. Of course, that's a nice side effect, but my basic belief when it comes to social entrepreneurship and social impact stuff is that it should ideally be something that emerges automatically once you do the right thing. I'm very excited about the fact that social entrepreneurship is on the rise and so on, but I sometimes find it a pity that it has become its own stream of business instead of being integrated into how you do business. And I can't say that I founded my company saying, oh, I have to build a social impact business. It's just that I believe this company will work better once it has objectives that are not only financial, but also non-financial. So I think there's always like 3 things that I had in my head when I decided what to do in my career or where to go. The first thing is that, of course, some people care about financial benefit. How much money can I make from something? Because at the end of the day, we all have to live off something, support our families, etc. The second thing is there's something about self-investment and trying to get the right skills, right? Because if you don't have the right skills to accomplish whatever dream you want to accomplish, then it might be harder to get there. And the third thing, I think, is getting a sense of a reputation or being appreciated for what you do, building a brand for yourself, and so on. That's the things I think about. Now, when it comes to Africa Foresight Group, the company that I started building last year, the idea behind Africa Foresight Group basically is to build an African McKinsey. And this is not just because I think that would be a good thing to do. It's because I see there as a niche where I think that you can actually have a lot of financial benefits by doing that. At the same time, I think that the team that I'm working with and myself will actually be able to build a great reputation from it because no one else has done this before the way we are trying to do it. And thirdly, I think that I'm learning a lot from it because I'm starting to become an industry expert on a lot of things where it would have taken me much longer at McKinsey to do the same thing. I was at McKinsey in the German office. I had a lot of battles with them because after 1 year of working there, I didn't want to work in Germany anymore. I said, give me African projects. And then I went out and did all kinds of African studies, and they started being really angry because it didn't create any revenue for the German office. So I would have taken much longer to build the same degree of expertise that I'm building now. For me, it's all about looking at, okay, if I was in Germany as a McKinsey consultant, there's 2,000 McKinsey consultants in Germany. How special is my skill set compared to all the other consultants there? I'd say not very special. I mean, I was always the exotic person that was popular on a team because the clients were, oh, you also have black people at McKinsey. But apart from that, there was nothing that was very outstanding. I was the only black person in McKinsey in Germany until I left. So, and we were 2,000 people. So yeah, of course, that's great. But apart from that, I wouldn't say that was not much that was different, right? When I look at my skill set and how I can apply that in Ghanaian or Nigerian markets, I think I have much more leverage for it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I didn't go to Ghana or Nigeria because I felt that I have a commitment to make up for my dad leaving or something. It's really because I see a huge benefit in it. And I think because of that, I also feel much more comfortable when someone doesn't say, oh, you're Ghanaian and you're helping us or something. I don't have a problem. It's okay. Because I'm maybe not. The nice side effect is that at the end of the day, we're trying to help building something that I would say is African pride. Because I think once you are able to build out more African businesses that are successful and have the same quality standard, you're automatically starting to have a lot of impact anyway, because people will be proud of that. And then it also doesn't really matter whether you grew up in Germany or in Ghana. And that makes me feel more home in a way, again, to close the loop. Because then I think that it's not people appreciating me because I have the right name in my passport and they heard Kumi and then they say, oh, actually you are from Ghana. They're actually feeling that I contributed to the country's success. And because of that, they start appreciating me as a local person. So yeah, I guess for me, social impact in a short note is more a positive side effect that, however, should always come out of what you do if you made the right decision.
Yes, that satisfaction deserves to be a selfish benefit, I think, at the same time. A lot of people who come home talk about the benefit of feeling that they can be innovative. So we had Michael who moved back to Kenya, and he said that thrill of having to do a lot of things yourself, having to roll up your sleeves and then creatively problem solve, because there was a lot of stuff that needed to be done, and that opportunity for innovation because it was a clean slate. Coupled with Yasmin spoke about, she moved back to Senegal, and her whole idea was the thrill of building a team from scratch. So being able to really take something that wasn't there before and grow it and originate it. So certainly the feeling that comes from careers that are quite different in a new pioneering space as giving yourself a benefit really, really is valid. Let's take some questions.
So this is very interesting because what I didn't mention is that my first job when I went to Ghana was actually impact measurement. I worked for a big project of the Gates Foundation in agriculture in 4 different countries and had to measure the impact because Gates is all about impact, and I had like 80 indicators that I had to collect data on, and it was really, well, dry work. But it made me think a lot about impact measurement. And I think the interesting thing about the non-financial and the financial is that if you have a framework around it, and of course McKinsey likes frameworks, blah, 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 but if you have a framework around it, then ideally there's a relationship between the two, right? So if I take an example for our company, I mean, we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to thinking about how we will eventually map out all our impact, be it financial or non-financial. But if I think of an example, a non-financial objective that we have is that we want the companies we work with, local companies mostly, because local companies are the ones that we want to serve the most, that they create new jobs. Now, of course, that in itself is not a financial objective because I don't necessarily make more money from that unless I design the contract in a way that I get the success fee the more jobs they build, but I've never seen that anywhere, so I don't think that will happen. So that's a social impact objective, you create employment and all of that. Now, for me, from a business perspective, though, it's actually a very financial objective at the same time. Because if I can prove that our team went into, I don't know, a big poultry manufacturer and helped this poultry manufacturer to regain market share and build new jobs, then this is going to create more business for me. Because then I'm starting to build a reputation that I'm actually able to do this with our company, which means I'm going to generate more revenue. That is the thing that I sometimes find disturbing when it comes to social impact, because it's always being delineated, and the case that social impact in itself creates financial benefit is not being taken into account. And I think also impact investing is a very interesting one, because impact investing, again, I totally agree with the person you mentioned, it should be the normal form of investing, because there's so many case studies about all this diversity, social impact, it all creates financial benefit. So the people who don't see that yet are actually still living in yesterday, in my opinion.
So
Right.
I want to. How do you?
Well, I would question what underpins that reclamation. If we're saying that we reclaim from what, and and I'm glad you brought up the example of sexuality and gender identity, right? Because the prevailing logic is that these are quote unquote Western sort of imports, which, if you have an understanding of history, you'll know is simply not true. In fact, what we call the gender binary is also an art. I mean, that's in itself is an artifact of colonization, right? So there's a kind of misreading and a misappropriation of history in a way that I think is really quite problematic, because I don't think that's necessarily about reclamation, but as you said, about power. And power asymmetries are absolutely crucial to definitions of home. And I think that's what makes it a complicated relationship, because if you're gay, if you are whatever the identity that you embody, if that identity is discriminated against, or you're at a disadvantage, it makes it difficult. But there are other people. There are people that are at home who are carving out space for themselves, and so there's resistance wherever there's power asymmetry. There's resistance, and there's a refusal to go away. And it should be on our own terms. So if you ask, if I wake up tomorrow and say I'm going to South Africa, I'm not going to go anywhere because somebody says that we've not accommodated for disability or for sexuality. In fact, that would probably make me want to stay more. So yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Let's get another question.
What's the role that is versus me trying as hard as I can? Just a question to you, calling from as you add skills back to the content. How did that work in an environment where if you go actually your actually already afraid of that, so that you might take up in Mali, in my country, if you have a student. A lot of people come actually like Yasmin, but when you have home being that stuff, both them from what I understood, both them today. How do you feel about not necessarily reality or whatever happens, but how do you feel about it? What's your return? That how you feel you can. There you go.
Yeah, so it's about taking the home to the West. Yeah. What is the question locally, nationally, and settling back in how the local community, some of those,
So I'll answer Ida's question at the back. I think that the world is changing really fast, and I think we can't assume that the models that we're thinking through at places like Oxford are going to stand the test of time and automatically be applicable in our home countries. I think that we need to go in with the mindset that we will be required to critically reflect on what it is that we know and make room for that to change. So basically, what that means is that we need to be very self-reflexive. We can't assume that, you know, my understanding of economics is going to apply to the world as we know it. And in fact, maybe we can take it a step further in saying that the knowledge systems that we are invested in now are becoming irrelevant, not even in an African context, even globally. We talk about technology, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, we talk about all of the things that are changing. And that means that we need to know things differently. Our knowledge production processes need to undergo a fundamental revision. And the opportunity might just be that Africa is maybe ahead of the curve, and that we think that we are, you know, going home to apply what we've learned, when in fact we might be in for a rude awakening and may have to start all over again in terms of what it is that we think we know, which I think is not a bad thing.
If I may add to that, though, I think one thing that is sometimes difficult is that when you come from Oxford and you, in my case, work with a company locally, then the first thing people, or when they read that you worked at McKinsey, the first thing that they think is, oh, now you can bring all the Western knowledge to us. Sometimes there's this expectation, no matter whether you want it or not, that you have all the answers because you know how it works in the West. And I think what I always say to that is that Oxford only taught me how to think, but apart from that, it didn't teach me anything. Same for McKinsey. Like what I think I know that I can really apply to the context that I'm working in now is to structure and try to decompartmentalize a problem. But when it comes to actually finding answers, I can't rely on most of the things I've learned in other markets or that I've learned in Oxford, because even though I was in the African Studies degree, which is a wonderful degree in Oxford, even that, this is all literature that was written by white academics. So it's the same thing, right? I can't just adapt that one-to-one. So I always try to say, let me try and make use of the structured way of thinking that I've learned, but then let me try to fill it with life from what I see locally. My biggest experience that also inspired me to start Africa Foresight Group was with a company called Daco Farms. The people here in the room who work with me have heard this story for 1,000 times, but Daco Farms is a big poultry producer who used to be the biggest West African poultry producer until the early 90s. And I decided to pick that company to study it for my master's dissertation in Oxford, because I had studied in South Korea when I was an undergrad, and I saw how family businesses had gotten quite big in South Korea and contributed to the economic development. But then I wondered why there's no big family business groups like this in West Africa. So I decided to study one that is really old. Daco Farms was founded in the 60s. And understand how their trajectory developed and why they started failing in the 90s. What I learned there was incredible, because the company did so many things that are very counterintuitive to what you would learn in an MBA. They started making investments in areas where you would be like, no, that is a very bad idea. Or they started taking new approaches to diversifying their business in a way that would not make sense to you unless you understand the local context. And writing that dissertation back then gave me so much inspiration to say, okay, actually, there's something that is a local African business model that is not documented anywhere, but is probably the much better answer to understanding how you can be successful in African market, how you can understand local consumer needs and things like that. It's not what AC Nielsen or Euromonitor tells you. It's what these people can tell you. And that's what I found so exciting about it, and that's what made me decide to start Africa Foresight Group. So I think that's very important, that you take your hardware, but then wipe everything out beyond that if you want to be able to absorb what is happening locally and really give a localized answer and understand how things work. To your question about globalization, I mean, I'm a bit of a technology Grinch, to be honest. I think that a lot of the political things or developments we see now are also because of technology marginalizing a lot of people. And while it's very interesting that Africa can leapfrog technology and we can now build hospitals and have people there who've never studied a medical degree because there's an app or something, fine. I'm sure that works, but I actually do believe that there's some sensitivities in African societies that I think are due to the history that African societies have gone through. I'm generalizing now because I don't know the whole of Africa, but I think that they make it even more important to be there if you really want to have an impact. So when it comes to doing business, or what I just spoke about, people having an expectation when you come from Oxford, or people calling you white even though you think you're not white. I mean, that's all coming from Africa always having, in my opinion, often having been the place that has been used by all kinds of other places in the world to develop. And I do think that trying to understand how different people think about what you do and getting the local feedback is very important to know what the right next step is. And I feel if you're not there, then you're not getting that exposure. You could probably say that about a lot of different places in the world, because it's always better to be there than not being there. But I just feel that the way in which societies work and the way in which some of the societies are also still vulnerable because of globalization makes it even more important that you can have local presence. And I also realized, maybe as a concluding remark, that Africa Foresight Group has been successful because we're local. I mean, we recently got an offer to start working with one of the former presidents of Ghana, who wants to build African multinationals. Because now that economies are slowing down everywhere in Africa, more leadership is starting to wonder, oh, maybe we need more big local businesses. And they told us that they also spoke to McKinsey, and they said in the end they decided to go for us because we are a local company. And because they know that people will perceive us differently because we are working with local people and we are in the local market, and that's where we collect our data and our expertise. And that makes them feel proud and more makes them feel that you can be trusted. And I think that's something that we shouldn't forget also if it's maybe more comfortable to send an email from New York or London.
I wish we had time. We've got Burks going absolutely no more. I'll leave you on the fact, try and work here at least for 2 to 3 years, get some global experience before you go home. You're always far more marketable. And this idea of going home if the community doesn't accept you, build relationships, relationships, relationships as much as you can with your communities back home, here and abroad. Thanks, everybody. I'm sure there's so much more we can discuss.
Thank you. Thank you.